that allowed the city up above to flourish.
Monsieur Dessert?
Yes.
Bonjour.
Bonjour, good morning.
Thank you for meeting with me.
Yes, very nice to assist you.
Underground expert Gerard Dussert was taking me from this quiet neighborhood, complete with a children's playground.
Okay, you ready?
I'm ready.
So let's open and you follow me.
All right, let's do it. Back to the starting point of the first aqueduct of medieval Paris.
It's like a temple dedicated to water.
A temple dedicated to
Yes,
water. That's what it looks like, the dome from the outside. This tower, known as the Regard de la Lanterne, is at the head of the Belleville Aqueduct, which 700 years ago was vital if Paris was going to thrive as a major city.
This aqueduct we are visiting today was one of the only sources of drinking water for the Parisians during more than 500 years.
In the 13th century, Paris was flourishing. Notre Dame was under construction, and more than 200,000 people lived here. So the aqueducts were necessary for the city to survive. So there are 3 channels here that collect water.
Yes.
And it drops it all into here, into this basin right
Routed to this basin, yes.
And it's still working.
It is still working.
It's still collecting water. It's incredible. Medieval engineers devised a way of collecting this precious resource. Groundwater would naturally filter through the soil before hitting an existing layer of dense clay. Since it couldn't pass through the clay, the water would simply accumulate in the trenches and slowly trickle down into the central basin. Despite being more than 500 years old, this simple technology still works today, hidden under a playground. But there was more. What do you got there? Look at that.
Just follow me.
Okay, that's an old lantern, isn't it? From the main room, we were able to follow the water's path back toward its source.
So this is where people could go for inspection, and water was just flowing in this small trench.
More than 500 years ago, this is where inspectors would have gone to make sure everything was in working order and that the water was clean and safe for drinking. Was it designed to do that?
Yes, it was necessary also to drain the water, not to let it accumulate behind the walls.
So it served 2 purposes.
2 purposes.
Not only to collect water, but also to drain water.
Exactly.
Though the medieval walls were strong enough to last hundreds of years, as the city rapidly expanded, they inevitably began to crack.
This is a reinforcement which has been made in the second half of the 19th century to avoid the collapsing of the slabs.
But even with the modern reinforcements, down here, it's a battle between cement and Mother Nature. There are roots growing in here, and they're literally pushing apart these stone slabs. This does not make me feel very secure. Today, the Belleville Aqueduct merely serves as a way of draining groundwater. Sections of it have been sealed off and filled in to allow new buildings to be constructed above it. These tunnels allowed the city to grow from a medieval town into one of the greatest cities in the world. But providing clean drinking water wasn't the only important job of the underground. Growing cities mean more people. More people means more waste. So alongside the aqueduct, and sharing the same ground with the miles of catacombs, is a massive sewage system famous around the world. I met with Professor George Wanklin. Professor Wanklin?
That's me.
Thank you for meeting with me.
My pleasure.
Who's going to take me to a place that saved the lives of thousands of Parisians. We were in just one section of the 150-year-old sewage tunnels beneath the streets, and modern Parisians have no idea how lucky they are that these things are down here. Covered sewers were first built in Paris in the 14th century. They stretched just 15 miles underground. This wasn't nearly extensive enough to accommodate the new urban population. The overflow of sewage was so bad that visitors said you could smell Paris before you could see it.
Walking around in Paris, where many of the streets were not paved and where all waste of all sorts went straight out the window and into the street, a good pair of boots would last you 1 year in Paris before they'd be eaten away by what was politely called the mud.
The abysmal state of sanitation in the city led to a series of violent outbreaks of cholera, a bacterial disease spread by water contaminated by human waste.
The 1832 epidemic of cholera killed somewhere between 18,000 and 20,000 Parisians. And then only 17 years later, there was another epidemic which killed 16,000 people.
Filthy water was going to take down the city, so Paris expanded their sewers to become the most modern and efficient sewers in the world at that time. Over 2 decades, the Paris sewer system grew by 450% to 340 miles. Today, it has grown to over 1,000 miles.
It's now about 2,300 kilometers. If you lined them all up, that would carry you from Paris to Moscow.
But the sewers make up only a small fraction of what lies beneath the city's streets.
You have the metro system. You've got catacombs. You've got underground parking garages. Paris is like a Swiss cheese underneath the surface of the city.
Without this saturated subterranean, this capital city might never have been. Up next, Notre Dame's underground secret.
Above our head right now is the huge square in front of Notre Dame Cathedral.
And there's probably 1,000 tourists up there, and they don't know we're down here.
It's one of Paris's most famous urban legends. Was Quasimodo real? To find out the real answer, go to history.com/cities for our new web series, The Naked Underground.
When it comes to Gothic architecture, Notre Dame Cathedral is one of the best examples in the world. For nearly 1,000 years, people have flocked here to admire it. But the history of this church goes back much further, and beneath it are remnants of a lost Roman city. In 52 BC, Julius Caesar conquered all of what is now France. And soon afterward, a Roman town called Lutetia, meaning mid-water dwelling, arose on the banks of the Seine. Over the next 2 centuries, Roman underworld came to light. My journey to find the lost city of Lutetia begins at one of the most important monuments in the world, Notre Dame. You must be Elaine?
You must be Eric.
Nice to meet you, Elaine.
Nice to meet you
Thank
too.
you for
Lovely.
meeting with me.
Thank you.
I met with medievalist Elaine Polly, who agreed to take me below Notre Dame, back to Paris's Roman roots.
You are going to find ancient Rome, and I'll show you how.
Going down just 16 feet below street level, we leaped back almost 2,000 years to Lutetia, a provincial Roman town of 20,000 people. In this very spot, dock workers and fishermen would have been busy supplying goods to the surrounding empire using one of Rome's most famous engineering marvels, roads. And what are these? These look great because I can identify steps, I can see walls.
Well, what you are looking at right here is a 2nd to early 3rd century road.
Lutetia's thriving riverfront was the earliest known port in France. Its prime location along the banks of the Seine allowed the city to boom.
There was a forum for doing business. Outside the city, there was an arena, which was an amphitheater for shows. There may have been gladiators. There was, where Notre Dame Cathedral stands now, a temple to Jupiter. It was a small town, but a comfortable town.
The small town, complete with its arena and temples, sat on the banks of the Seine River. Over the years, buildup and garbage have caused the location of the river to move 50 feet. But in Roman times, we would have been walking directly on its banks. This would have been the banks of the river, and I'm looking out at this monstrosity, and it goes on and on.
Yes, 2,000 years ago, you would have been in a fishing boat throwing your fish up onto the embankment.
So we would be in the River Seine.
We would be in the River Seine.
What's above our head right now?
Above our head right now is the huge square in front of Notre Dame Cathedral.
And there's probably 1,000 tourists up there, and they don't know we're down here. As Roman rule began to fall in the 4th and 5th centuries, the people of Lutetia, now called the Gallo-Romans, had no use for Roman temples. Instead, they needed protection. So they simply reused blocks of limestone, originally quarried from the catacombs to build their temples and other buildings, to now build their massive and much-needed fortification walls. Ancient recycling at its best.
Right here in the middle, you are looking at a section of Gallo-Roman wall built at the end of the 3rd century.
But this 3rd century wall was much older than that. It was originally part of an ancient arena that was once packed with people during the height of Roman rule. So they pilfered this stone from another building, from the arena, to make a new wall here.
That is exactly right. They built a wall right here because of the first barbarian invasions, which took place the end of the 3rd century. All sorts of people were invading in those days. The Germanic tribes, later on the Normans. You also had Attila the Hun in 451.
In the 5th century, one tribe of invaders, the Franks, did make it over these walls. They claimed the land as their own, and from then on it was called France in their name. The Franks made Paris their capital city and built a church on this site.
Over here to the right, you have the ruins of St. Genevieve Church. They built a church so that they could keep her relics here where they would be safe inside the wall.
And dates to what era?
Dates to the 9th century.
And so there's, what, 600 years between these two sites that are 5 feet apart?
That is exactly right.
This site was used yet again in 1163, this time for one of the world's most imposing structures that today just happen to be sitting above our heads.
So many people come to see Notre Dame because when they think of Gothic architecture, they think of Notre Dame.
And they think of the Eiffel Tower, or the Louvre, or the wide boulevards that lead to the Arc de Triomphe. But few think about what lies beneath. It's a world of remnants from a lost Roman city. Bone-filled catacombs. Ingenious engineering that saved the city from disease. Even Nazi bunkers, whose walls have become a palette for modern artists. Beneath Paris sits a limestone labyrinth dating back to the Roman Empire, full of artwork, bunkers, skulls, and bones. Today, urban explorers are adding their own layer. And next time you walk over a manhole on the streets of Paris, who knows what or who is beneath your feet.